All right, welcome to this remote interview. My name is Lisette, and I'm interviewing people and companies doing great things remotely. And today on the line, all the way from 15 kilometers from where I am in Rotterdam in the Netherlands, I have Jurgen Appelo. And Jurgen, you are an entrepreneur, an author, a keynote speaker on agility and leadership and innovation. And you're also an avid Wingspan player. We'll get to that. And after founding Management 3.0, Happy Melly, and Agility Scales, your newest project might be your most innovative yet, the unFIX model, which is an organizational design tool that specifically keeps in mind remote workers and hybrid working. So we've got a lot to dive into, but let's start with the first question, which is, what does your virtual office look like, and what do you need to get your work done?
Hey, Lizette. Yeah, great intro. Awesome to be here on your podcast. To start off with your question, what my office looks like, I have a small room. We have a big house, an embarrassingly big house, but I picked the smallest room to feel cozy with my office. And I'm looking at a blue forest that I painted myself on the walls because during COVID times, I discovered a talent that I never knew I had, which is painting walls. So I've been going through my entire house by now, painting everything, the walls and the doors and the trim and whatnot. And in my little office, I decided to be very creative. So I painted a blue forest of trees in 7 colors of blue, and it cost me 400 meters of masking tape to get this forest done. But that shows a bit. I think what I need is a bit of me around me. I want to feel that the environment around me reflects my creativity. And that's also the bookcase that you see behind me, because we are recording this with video. The people, of course, won't be able to see it on the podcast, but the bookcase behind me was designed by me. And created by a carpenter, because I cannot do that, sadly. But yeah, I want things to be creative around me, and preferably things that I designed.
Indeed, yeah, and it's kind of surprising. For some people, it doesn't matter at all, the environment that's around them. Like my husband, he's just got these 4 white walls, like in a box. I would go crazy in an environment like that every day, but that totally works for him. It keeps him focused, he said. So for you, having that creativity and the color around is what you need to get your work done.
Definitely, definitely. And to be honest, I also need variety. So I was so happy that the lockdown was over here in the Netherlands. So in the morning I could go to the coffee bar again, as I would like to do. I did that this morning as well, and I have some of my favorites. A good, comfortable chair is important, and good coffee, of course. So I sit there for 2 or 3 hours, get my emails done, do a bit of writing, and then I return back home to my little office and continue my work there and have meetings and podcasts and such. So variety is important in my work, because it's a bit boring to be in the same little room for 8 hours straight. And but creativity as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love working from home, I think more than most people in the world, but even I during the pandemic was having a really hard time. Like, it's good to change it up. It's good to move your place for, especially for your brain and getting out of a rut and just having new experiences. I mean, that's why we go on vacation, right? To rest and get new input for so speaking of creative projects, the unFIX model. I'd like to dive into what you've done because it's extremely impressive. And for those that don't know, I will have said this in the introduction, but Jurgen and I worked together for a long time. I was the remote office manager for the Management 3.0 team. So I've seen a lot of experimentation, but this tops it all, I think. I was going to say it tops the cake, but I think that's the wrong metaphor. So I'd like to talk about the unFIX model because you said it's an organizational design tool that specifically keeps in mind remote workers and hybrid working, but it's so much bigger than that. Let's talk about what it is exactly and why, how it came to be that you created this.
Well, a good question, of course, and let's begin with where we came from. I've been responsible for Management 3.0, of course. You know that, and I have always presented that as a toolbox, as good practices that I borrowed from many sources to be inspired by. And you can use kudo cards or delegation poker or a celebration grid or whatever. Use them all. Use only one, whatever works for you. That is by design. But it was never a framework. It was never one cohesive model that we could offer to organizations. That was its benefit, but also its drawback. So it never really competed with the likes of the Scaled Agile Framework or large-scale Scrum or Holacracy or Spotify model, which come with pictures of how your organization would look like after the agile transformation, quote unquote. And I noticed pictures sell. That is what executives and managers want to see. They want to see a picture of what the organization could look like in the future. And I had never been able to solve that problem of how do I paint a picture of what the future could be.
I
And
would almost say, and sorry to interrupt, but I wouldn't say that pictures sell, but being able to visualize what you're about to experience is probably what sells, right? Like being able to see
right.
like what's about to happen. But okay, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, exactly. And well, some things just take a bit of time, I suppose. I had to wait for the right inspiration to arrive. And part of the inspiration was Team Topologies by Emmanuel Pais and Matthew Skelton. Other inspiration was Heidi Helfand's book on dynamic reteaming. And there were more sources that I got my inspiration from. Organization design books, I read a couple of them recently. And then things started to click. Then I was able to come up with something that's cohesive and that has a picture. That's something you can draw. And the response has been overwhelming. I can say it's just crazy, the invites that I get to talk about this at events, and the community that I launched already has hundreds of people drawing organization designs with the template that I offered recently. Because the idea of the model is, I compare it with Lego. I like that metaphor of Lego. I loved Lego when I was young. Is that I had a huge box with Lego blocks, and I could make almost anything with all those blocks. And my brother had Playmobil. I don't know if you know Playmobil as well.
I do, yeah.
Of course, we argued with each other which was better, Lego or Playmobil. Obviously, I thought Lego was better because I could make almost anything. And with Playmobil, the whole castle was already done. That's how it came out of the package. The castle was finished, and you could just move your figures and your horses and knights around, etc. That was boring.
Yeah, what if you didn't want a castle?
Exactly. You couldn't turn that into a cruise ship if you wanted, but that's exactly what I did with Lego. I had spaceships, and I turned them into monsters, and I turned them into whatever. That's the analogy or the metaphor that I like with unFIX, because it has a couple of building blocks: the value stream crew, the facilitation crew, the platform crew, and so on. It's just 7 types of crews, a couple of forums, a couple of types of bases, and that's it. There's basically a dozen or so building blocks, and then go ahead, build whatever you want. That's the idea, which is now what happens. People are posting screenshots of their organization designs. Of course, there are some constraints built into the blocks. Like with Lego, you can only put them together in a certain way. And that is also the idea with unFIX. Like, one constraint is no managers anywhere. They are only allowed in the governance crew, nowhere else. That's one constraint of this model. And there are a few more. But then you can build different things. And that is how it is different from other models out there, which basically show you this is what you get. This is the castle as it comes out of the box. And you can move your teams around as if they are those little figures from one place to the other, but the castle is made basically. It's fixed, and that's why I came up with the term unFIX, because I would like to unFIX those approaches. They need to be broken down into its individual parts, and then reuse them again to build other stuff. That was my intention with the model, and yeah, I think so far the results are pretty good.
So how would people go about then using this model? Or what situation would one need to be in for this to be useful? Is it an organization going through change? Is it just somebody trying to visualize their process? Who is this for?
Well, it is for anyone who is in the middle of an agile transformation or thinking about reorganizing their company. Any manager or well, whatever role you're in, basically, where you're concerned about the future and you feel that the organization needs to adapt and it needs to have a different form in order to do that. And you know that that form is probably a temporary form, because form follows function. As we know from organization design, you need to know what the purpose is of the business in order to know what the structure is that that the business needs. This also follows from Conway's law. Maybe you have heard of that law, which basically says you see the organizational structure in the architecture of the product. If you open a product, you can basically see the individual teams and departments there, because there's no way of hiding your internal structure in the structure of the product. That means that if your products change, if the solutions need to change that you offer to your customers, your team structures will have to change as well. So you need to be fluid in how you organize yourself as a company. And that means you need some Lego thing just to play, just to draw pictures and say, well, we could be like this, or we could be like that, or we could be like this, a couple of options, scenarios, do a little bit of painting with a Miro board and the unFIX blocks, and then wonder, okay, what kind of structure would create the kind of products and solutions that we intend to offer in the next couple of years, knowing that it will change over time, because every business will have to transform every now and then, depending on what is happening in the environment. So yeah, anyone who is concerned about organizational change and wonders what kind of team structure do we need, where do the product managers go? What about HR responsibilities? Where do we put sales and marketing? Those kinds of questions I would like to start answering with unFIX. And there's also a difference between this model and others out there. Most of them focus just on product development, on the feature teams, on product managers, etc. And then it stops. But many organizations wonder, okay, what about finance? What about support? What about portfolio management? What about many others who are involved somehow in the organization? That is left undefined in LESS or in Scrum at Scale or in Nexus. SAFe does a bit of that, but still does not define where the functional managers go. So I try to address those issues, and I made a start. This is version 1. I'm sure things will look different a year from now, but I think, yeah, we're off to a good start.
Well, if there's anything that I've learned about business processes in my time in businesses, it's that they are constantly evolving. There is no utopia of like, this works and this is what we're going to stick with forever and ever. It just seems like if you're not constantly looking at these things on a regular basis, you're doing your company a disservice. So sadly, there's no Valhalla to end up in. It's just we keep evolving over time.
Indeed.
But how do we know if we need to restructure? mean, this probably shows my naivety in terms of being able to run a big business. I have a very small company, but how does a company know, like, hey, we should try this unFIX model? What would the signs be within the company?
That's actually a great question. What would be the trigger points? I like to start with the experience of customers, users, and employees, because I think that it's ultimately about the experience economy, well, some of my favorite quotes are from Clayton Christensen, who said, "New products succeed not because of the features they enable, but because of the experiences they offer to customers." And Kathy Shera, a famous game designer, says something similar. It's not your job to make awesome features. It is your job to make awesome users. Make your users of your product feel awesome about themselves by using your product. So I like to say, I don't care about your product. I care about my experience. And that's where your product could offer something. So we need to start with the experience of users and customers, but also the experience of employees. What does it mean to work at this organization? Because, well, you know as well as I do, probably in the US, they have the Great Resignation going on.
Globally, it's really
Glo
global. Yeah.
Yeah, the whole world is struggling with hybrid working. There's a huge move towards the gig economy with independent workers and freelancers who need to be treated well. So the employee experience is also a big topic. So if we start with experience and then figure out what is the pain that people well, experience, then that should be a trigger for organizational change. And I have plenty of things that happen to me every day that are painful, whether it's me as a customer or me as a freelancer or me as whatever role that I am in, that I feel should be a trigger for organizations to change some things in order to keep me as someone who was interested in their organization.
Indeed, I sure have opinion on every app in my in my phone. I have a suggestion for how to make it better. I can tell you that.
For sure. And to be honest, and I've shared this example a couple of times before, so maybe I should come up with a different example by now. But anyways, it's not only the app. Sometimes the app is great, but then something else is a problem. So I recently deleted one of the big supermarket apps from my phone because the app was great. The app was perfect, I would almost say. But when I made my order, 3 days later they came to deliver my stuff. I got a message 2 hours before, said, "Sorry, we have no yogurt." And then they came and I had no yogurt. And that happened 3 times with 10 orders that they did not deliver something that I had ordered. And I think you had 3 days. You had 3 days to get the yogurt. Why is that a problem? I can get yogurt in 5 minutes because I have 5 supermarkets at walking distance. Why do you force me to go out the door and go to the supermarket? Then I can just as well get everything. What's the whole point of ordering through the app, right? And that is what I mean with the experience. It is more than just the product. And you don't get that with just agile thinking that is product focused feature teams, because they just focus on making the app perfect. Well, guess what? I deleted the app. Sorry for that product team, but logistics sucked in this case. And there are countless of these examples. And I had recently, from the other side, from the perspective of a freelancer, I got a request from one of the big social networks to offer a learning course. I won't tell you which one it was, but let's suppose they called Twitter. Okay, so Twitter contacted me and asked me to become a supplier. I said, "Oh, sure, that sounds fun." And then they sent me this list of 15 documents that I had to provide as a freelancer, including a copy of my passport, VAT form, bank forms, even my revenue statement as a company, and so on and so on. And I said, I'm not doing this. Sorry, I'm not doing it. I don't want to be treated like that. I find this disrespectful. If I do all this, I want to see the same from your CEO. Well, I don't think they they would do that.
Right.
So yeah, sorry, no deal. And I lost the customer, but I'm happy with it, because this is not the way you should treat your freelancers, and, well, in a broader sense, your gig workers and suppliers and vendors. So experience is an
Indeed.
important thing.
Indeed, which is a great trigger, because I think every company can think about which, we all know which part of our companies need work and which experience isn't going exactly the way that we would want it to. And it seems like actually one of the triggers that it just occurred to me that really one of the triggers now is companies that were totally remote during the pandemic and now going back to hybrid, right? Like the way you did things before is not going to work in a hybrid environment. And the way you did things remotely is not going to work in a hybrid environment. This is the perfect opportunity to actually go through and restructure and redesign the operations of your organization. And in fact, I would go so far as to say, if you don't go back and restructure your operations in an organization, it is just going to be nothing but pain moving forward, especially in the hybrid world. Because in the hybrid world, it's like herding cats, right? We're everywhere. We're all working at different times when we're most productive. You know, some people are night people, other people are morning. So yeah, it's going to be a totally different scenario. How would somebody start? What's the best place to, like, if I were going to dig in and say, like, okay, I know I need to restructure my operations in my company. I trust Jurgen. I've seen his work before. I want to use the unFIX model. How would I start?
Yeah, that question comes up every now and then. And of course, I don't have a good answer, because, as consultants and coaches say, it depends. It depends on who is enthusiastic. It depends on where are the innovators in your organization, because the theory says that it starts with the innovators and early adopters. Every change in every organization starts with those who are enthusiastic about the change. Well, that could be a software developer, it could be an HR person, it could be a sales and marketing person. I cannot predict who is the most enthusiastic about change. So you need to find the innovators in the organization and have them together for a cup of coffee, and then and then things will start from there. But a good starting point would be figuring out what part of a larger organization could begin operating as if they were their own little autonomous unit. I call that a base in unFIX language, because well, one or two steps back, for something that I find missing in the other frameworks and methods that are available is the concept of a place of belonging. And that ties into the employee experience. It is always about the product group, or the product or solution that is created for customers, etc., etc. But no employee ever quits their job because of a product group definition or something. They quit their jobs because they don't feel they belong. They quit their jobs because they don't get recognition. They feel that they cannot make a good contribution. So it is about the home where you feel you belong to. And I have the experience of 20 years ago that I worked at a consultancy company, 4,000 people. I didn't know any of them except one HR person and one direct manager, because their business model was renting out my brain to the highest bidder. And so I ended up with a team of 4 people, and those I liked. I liked my team. Those were the only people I knew. So my sense of belonging was just that team of 4 people, and I cared nothing about the rest of the organization. That is a problem, because I quit my job within a year, because
Right.
I didn't feel I fit in there. So that is the first thing to address, I think. What small group of people would create a base together where people feel a sense of belonging, as if they're running their own little company of between, I don't know, 5 to 20 or 50 people, almost autonomous, and that would also capture one or more products or one or more solutions, because that depends. Sometimes one product requires 25 people or something. Sometimes that's 5 different products, depending on the type of organization. So you need to draw a boundary somehow around a base. And that is, I think, the first mission of managers, figuring out how can we spin off bases in this organization, autonomous organizations. And maybe remember a long time ago that I went to China, to Qingdao, for a company called Hire, big company. And there I learned that they are basically organized as what they call micro enterprises of, on average, between 5 to 25 people, that are fully autonomous. They run themselves as if they're little startups and scale-ups, and the whole company consists of 4,000 of these autonomous units. No middle management above, no huge number of management layers. Is just this ecosystem of micro enterprises that sometimes cluster together to offer something bigger with each other, because not all products can be made with just 25 people. Sometimes you need to join a bigger group, but they leave that to self-organization of the bases. And then they sign contracts with each other, smart contracts. All of it is digital, and that is super inspiring. But that is like sort of a flag at the horizon, right? That's where you could end up with. If you start spinning off bases from your organization and make them autonomous units, at some point you would be an ecosystem of these self-organized units that collaboratively decide who gets to work with whom. And at Hire, which is the biggest manufacturer of household appliances in the world, they're called the Toyota of China, basically, in terms of how inspirational they are. They have multiple HR departments. They have multiple of everything, because those are all bases that offer their services to other bases. So imagine that you run your own little micro enterprise, and you can choose which HR department that you want to work with, because guess what? They see themselves as offering a service to the rest of the company. And if they don't do a good service, nobody's going to ask them to help with people development and everything. So I find it super inspirational. It is, of course, quite extreme for some organizations to organize themselves like that, but you could do this step by step. You could begin with one unit of small number of people that feel that together they have a home. I call that the base. Within that container, you use unFIX to structure your teams, and because there are lots of ways to do that. That's the Lego box,
Right,
that you can use. And then if that is successful, you do it with another base and another, and all of them look different. That's the beauty of unFIX, right? Every base has a different problem, and every base will need a different structure.
So it really, the imagery that I'm getting as you're speaking is I'm seeing like the top-down typical hierarchy structure that we've had in the past. Anybody that's worked sort of in one of these old big firms, you've seen like there's the CEO and then the managers and the next, and then there's all the people at the bottom. So the typical structure, but this feels more like pods, like individual pods floating, you know, like almost like amoebas. That's the imagery that I'm sort of getting, because there's no fixed place for them. They're sort of floating to where they need to be. It sounds like it would be scary. Like this hierarchy one sounds pretty good for a manager, because it's all, nothing's moving, right? It's like a fixed system. So that sounds pretty nice. You know, if I was a manager, that sounds like what I'd want. But the pod sounds like it's reality, and that actually the fixed system was never really fixed to begin with, if we really look back at it. But I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
No, exactly. That's why I call my model unFIX, because I want to do something about it. That's the whole point of the brand. Now, Hire did this the disruptive way. At one point, the CEO said all middle managers are fired. Basically, that was thousands of people. They had a choice. They could run their own micro enterprise, their base, as an entrepreneur, and many did that, or they could find themselves a different job elsewhere. But there was no room for middle management anymore. That was painful, of course, but he was a CEO. He could do that. And by the way, he wrote the foreword for my book, Management 3.0. So you can see how this all comes together. I met him in Qingdao in China. So he did this the disruptive way. Now, I think you don't need to do this the disruptive way. So suppose you have this traditional hierarchical organization, you could do this step by step with beginning with new products and services that you are playing with, that you're trying out. Okay, begin there, because that will be the new generation of yourself as a company, right? So begin there with small startups and internal startups and scale-ups using unFIX. Leave the rest alone for a while until you have some good experiences, and then you might take chunks of that larger organization and turn them into bases. But at the same time, I also say every now and then, never change a working program. Hey, if that hierarchy is working for you now, just keep it as it is and milk the cow for as long as the cow is still giving milk. But that business model that traditional organization is exploiting, at some point it will probably be over. It will be dead, and then you will need your ecosystem of bases that you have been slowly but steadily creating. So maybe there's also this idea. You can have this idea of this ecosystem is growing while that big old traditional organization is slowly diminishing in importance. So I see different options there in terms of how would you do such a transformation. I think the disruptive approach is certainly not for everyone, but possible.
Right. Right, not appropriate for every situation, right? Just like, yeah, just like with hybrid working, right? It's going to be different. It looks different for every company. That's what makes it so difficult. Is I wish there were a silver bullet formula that everybody could just follow, but
yeah, there is not.
man.
But there are definitely things that apply to almost everyone in terms of principles and patterns. You mentioned hybrid working, and of course you have a podcast on remote working and such. I also try to make sure that unFIX is at least not in conflict with the concept of hybrid working and remote working. We need to see that as the new normal, to use a cliche word. And there's so many things that we have learned over the last 2 years. For example, to give you one random example, I have learned that everyone hates the commute. It is the most hated moment of the day throughout the world, but surprisingly, it serves a purpose. It turns out that it allows you to switch identity. From you transition from being one version of me to another version of me, the private version to the business version. Both of them are authentic. They're not in conflict, but you behave differently after that. And that's what the commute is for, this gentle transition from one state to another. And people miss that when they work remotely and they sit in their own home and they feed the baby while they have their colleagues on the phone and things like that. And then your different me's get entangled. And it turns out that this contributes to burnout and such consequences. That's dangerous. So you need to have, as I have learned, these moments of transition, of going in and out of your professional life, even if it's just a brief meditation exercise, or you just physically walk from one room to the other, or one part of the room to another part of the room, just to remind yourself, I am now in professional mode, and now I'm going back to private mode. Like I have the luxury of having my own office at home, so I walk in and out of my office. That helps. But not many people have that. And this is also important to recognize these basic human needs. And then we get back to the employee experience. There is very few frameworks and methods take into account what is the basic human need there that we need to take into account when we structure ourselves. Because quite often, actually, the advice is a bit outdated, old-fashioned, and it's not up to date with the modern times that we live in now.
And it also seems like finding what we need and then designing for it is also a new skill that people need to learn. And the idea is we don't want to put the commute back in, but rather we need to find things that work for us that replace this commute. And I think one of the more inspiring things is I'm inspired lately by Cal Newport's latest book, A World Without Email. I just think it's just so geniusly written. And one of the things that he says is people should be in charge of their own productivity. I know what I need for myself in order to be most productive. Like nobody else can tell me that. And teams also know what they need in order to be most productive. So teams should be deciding how they operate, not some random component. So speaking of random components, you've taken out managers out of sort of this equation, or you've put them in a particular place. You said it says managers exist only at the base level. And I just want to dive into that quickly before we run out of time. But I want to ask why? Why have you separated out managers from the teams in that respect?
Indeed, that's I think that is an essential part of unFIX. The management issue is not addressed in other frameworks. By design, the scaled agile framework, for example, and large-scale Scrum do not mention where the managers go. That means if you keep it undefined, they could be anywhere. Someone else on your team could be your manager, or the product manager could be the line manager. And with manager, I mean the one who determines your pay, hires you, fires you, right? Does perhaps your annual performance appraisal if the company has such a traditional practice, that kind of line management or functional managers. These people play a role. And if you do not define where they go, then they could be anywhere, it could be any person, and then you end up by default with a matrix organization. Now, I have learned from organization design that the matrix organization has already been discredited a few decades ago. It doesn't work. They already knew that when we in the Agile community introduced, for example, the Spotify model, which is a matrix organization. Organization design theorists would have said, what are you doing? We already know that's not a good idea. So because one thing, and I found that super interesting, the problem with the matrix is that people on a team have different managers. And I have been in such a situation indeed, where if there's a conflict, then it escalates to the managers. But those managers, they often don't know each other. They have managers somewhere else in different departments who also don't know each other. And it takes a couple of jumps up the hierarchy for things to come together somewhere. And it means that these in programming language, exceptions escalate, they bubble up the chain until finally someone can make a decision. And someone just last week in a workshop said to me, yeah, we had that basically only the CEO could resolve everything because he got a ridiculous number of issues, the most simple things that could not be resolved by managers in that matrix structure because they were in different parts of the organization. So they simply escalated up until the CEO had to make all stupid decisions. So the side effect of a matrix organization is it makes your organization more central because more stuff gets escalated higher up the chain. So that is an unintended side effect of such scaling models. If they don't tell you where the managers go, you end up with a matrix organization and things start bubbling up and you have a more central feel to the organization. So I said, I want managers to be clear where they go. They're in the governance box, the blue box in the unFIX model. That's their position, and stay out everywhere else. You're not on any other value stream teams, not on the platform crew, not on any of the others. but they have a role, and that's how it connects with Management 3.0, where I say the role of managers is to take care of the system and not manage the people, right? And so the base has one governance crew, could be 2, 3, 4 people. That's the management team of the base, basically. That's it. Those are the only managers. They have to make sure that the base works, that people have a sense of belonging, because if they quit because they don't feel that they belong, it's the manager's fault, because they need to create that environment where things can thrive and bloom, etc. And then stay out of everything else, because the teams will take care of the customers, etc. And that, by the way, that also resonates wonderfully with what, for example, Richard Branson says of Virgin. He said, employees come first, and then they will take care of your customers. This is exactly what he said. And that's also reflected in my unFIX model. For the managers on the base, employees come first, because then in the value stream crews, they will take care of the customers. And by the way, also the suppliers, in my opinion, because those also need a great experience. And that's how it all works together. So managers need a place to go. Otherwise, you get a matrix with all the problems that entails.
I really like how this fits into leadership too, because one of the things that I learned from building this distance leadership course was that one of the main differences between remote leadership and in-person leadership is that with in-person leadership, leaders can rely on their charisma and their personalities, right? When you're in the office, you can really lead by just being the loudest, most inspiring voice in the room. When we go remote, that charisma doesn't come across in the same ways. And what people are really craving from their leaders is more structure. So there's like two kinds of work, right? There's work execution, and then there's workflow. So there's somebody, or there's somebody that has to build the system for how the work will flow through it. I feel like the leader should be in that system building, and the team should be in the doing phase. Like, oh, we're doing, but the leaders are kind of, and like what you said, like the leaders should set the goals and then take the roadblocks out of the way so that our teams can take us there. Like somebody has to set the goal. And anyway, lots of random thoughts that you're bringing up.
It makes perfect sense, and it connects to the gardener metaphor that I have used in Management 3.0, where you, as a manager, are responsible for the garden, the soil, the nutrients, the availability of sunlight. That's it. You cannot make the plants grow; they have to do that themselves. So the value will emerge if the constraints are put in place correctly. So that's the role of the managers. And I find the idea is laughable, basically, that you can organize companies without management, and these things have been suggested in the past. We do things without management. Maybe you do not have managers, but management still needs to be done. I don't care how you call them, but the system still needs to be managed, because an unmanaged system is anarchy, and that has proven not to work. So you need self-organization to produce something useful. And from complexity science, I know that there's no self-organization without constraints. Well, guess who's responsible for the constraints? The managers, in my language, and they go in the blue box and nowhere else.
I love it. I love it. So the last thing that I want to end on is a quote that I got from your unFIX model on the website. And I'll be putting this in the show notes for people so you can easily find all of this. And the graphic will go to, so people understand what the blue box means. For those who are listening, you'll definitely want to check it out. But in this article, you say, if you want an organizational structure that can handle the challenges of the 21st century, you need to ensure that there's practically no difference between a physical team and a virtual team. What did you mean by that?
Well, no surprise that you picked that out.
Of course. I've got my own bias.
Of course, that's why we're here. Well, you know me, I have 12 years of experience working remotely, long before many other people came into this remote virtual world of work. So I am biased as well. I see that I can get plenty of things done As I have tweeted before, work is not a place where you go, work is something that you do. And you completely agree with that, I know. So I find it important to emphasize this in my in the unFIX model, that whether it is a value stream crew or a platform crew or a capability crew, there are different kinds of teams, and I call them crews because I like that word. It means that they're on a journey to get something done, but they always go back to the base. That's the
I think of Star
language.
Trek.
Yeah,
Like I've got my
exactly.
captain on my ship and the star. Yeah, we're a
Exactly. Yeah.
crew.
So
Yeah.
I like that language. But hey, if you prefer team or squad, that's all fine. But no matter what they're doing, no matter what type of crew or team it is, they get stuff done. And I don't care if they work fully co-located, fully remote, or with some hybrid way of working in between. That shouldn't really matter. In fact, you should work backwards from the experience. What is the experience that would be great for customers? And then if you have that in mind, you will figure out what is the best way of organizing ourselves. In many cases, it doesn't matter. In some cases, it would be good if the team was fully distributed. Or in some cases, it would be best if the team was fully co-located. It depends on what kind of experience are we trying to offer to our customers here. Because if it is 24 hours customer support, well, guess what? It would be good to have a team of a few people all around the planet being able to take over from each other. But if it's a healthcare team, you would like to have them to be in the same building probably. Otherwise, it's very difficult to treat a patient. It depends, as always. So, and I think those cases where the experience guides that decision and says, well, collocate is more useful here, or remote is more useful here. That's probably a small percentage, and I believe, and in most cases, doesn't matter, because the customers don't see actually where people are working. So, and then the employee experience is most important. Where do people like to work? At home, at the office, a bit of both. I said yesterday, I have a new thing that I came up with. The remote collocation balance is the new work-life balance, as far as I'm concerned. So that's my takeaway for now.
So then here's a loaded question that I think I already know the answer to, but I just have to ask, what do you think about the mandates that companies are giving for saying we're mandating you to come back to the office 2-3 days a week, what X number of days per week, per month? How do you feel about these mandates?
Yeah, I don't think it works, and you've already seen probably, as I have, that some have stepped back from such mandates. I believe it was Amazon or Apple or one of them had such a mandate, and then a lot of protests from their employees. So I call that they go from a rotational hybrid. That's what it is basically. They rotate from the top. They mandate which people are in the office when. They go to full flex hybrid, where teams decide for themselves and leave it up to the team level to figure out what is most useful for whom. I think that's the best approach. But hey, not everyone is wise in one day. It can take a step or two to get there. It is never the other way around. It is never that there's a fully flex hybrid approach as they have at Spotify and Salesforce, for example. Those companies basically say, hey, we have offices. It's up to you to use them or not, as long as you get the work done. That I think is best. It never goes from that model to rotational hybrid, where they say, well, we tried that, doesn't work. From now on, everyone has to be at the office on Tuesday, Thursday, and
it's true.
and Friday.
It never goes the other way around, right?
Exactly.
We never go to mandates. Yeah.
Right. So,
and I really believe that people in general want to do a good job. I mean, you're always going to have a George Costanza in the bunch somewhere. There's always going to be someone like that somewhere. But in general, people want to do a good job. And if that means that we have to be at the office, then they'll go to the office. And if it means that we have to be remote, then we'll be remote. Like, I just feel like people will decide where the best place is based on the task that needs to be done. And that let's
Definitely.
trust
And
them
then
to do it.
yeah. And then of course there are lots of things that you need to figure out, like how do we take meetings when 3 are in the office and 4 are remote, and there are lots of guidelines and suggestions for that. So you should just set up a hybrid working channel on Slack or Teams or whatever you use and share these tips and come to some agreements that work for everyone. Because yeah, it's the case that people who might feel left out if there are a couple at the office sitting together during a meeting and not paying enough attention to those who are calling in remotely, but others have no issues with that whatsoever. It all depends on context. On the other hand, you get richer experiences with people calling in from many different parts in the world. I mean, I had a meeting not long ago with someone from Japan and South Africa and the US and Germany or something. That's cool. Try to do that at the office tomorrow. That's that's pretty hard
Exactly.
to accomplish. So innovative capability goes can go through the roof with people from joining from across the globe. That's a benefit of working remotely. Well, I don't need to explain that to you, Lizette. I'm pretty
No,
I'm
but it
pretty
is a good
sure.
reminder that diversity is a superpower, and diversity
Yeah,
comes in many different forms. And that is really one of the things that the remote option offers, is more diversity, yeah, from all
yeah,
over the world. And it is
yes.
really cool to be able to be in a call with Germany, Japan, and the US and the Netherlands all at the same time. I mean, it's kind of
Definitely.
amazing.
And also what I learned is people share more easily their perspectives and their opinions when joining remotely than they do when they come to the office. So the arguments of Tim Cook and others who said thou shalt be in the office because this is better for innovation and brainstorming, they didn't think of the psychological aspect of being in the same room with everyone and then feeling that uh, the corporate norms pressing on you basically because you're back at the office and you can't say everything there anymore. You more easily say things when it's remote because there's literally this thing between us, which is the computer and a lot of distance. And you want that. You want those perspectives to be shared. You want the painful things to be revealed. So that can be good for innovation, creativity, and problem solving. To discuss things not with everyone in the same room, but joining from many locations. That's something I thought was inspiring when I read that.
Love it. Well, I feel like I'm pushing my luck on the time here, so I want to make sure that, that we get out of here on time. But Jurgen, so for last question, softball question, which is if people want to learn more about the unFIX model, where should they go?
That's the easiest question you've asked me,
I know,
Lizette.
right?
That's unFIX.org. That is where the website is. There's a community. You'll be able to find it there. There's hundreds of people who joined already. And I love seeing some screenshots of people drawing their own organizations with the Lego blocks that the model offers. That's pretty cool. So yeah, I hope people will join me there at unFIX.org and help me evolve the model because I have version 1, but I'm sure things will look different a year from now. And I look for inspiration on how to, in which direction to take it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Jurgen. I took copious notes and I look forward to sharing them in the show notes for everybody. Thank you so much.
Thanks for the chance to talk about it. Is that?
All right. Until next time, everybody, be powerful.